Ever get that feeling like you're trying to really understand something complex, but you don't want to wade through like a whole library of books?
Oh, yeah, I get it. You want that shortcut to the good stuff, right?
Exactly. You want those like key insights that actually stick with you.
Yeah.
The aha
The
moments.
stuff that makes you go, interesting. I can actually use this.
Yeah, precisely. And that's what we're all about in this deep dive.
That's right.
We're taking on a really fascinating, I think, strategy from Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War.
Oh, good one.
It's called, and this is a great name, Negotiate While Advancing.
Ooh, I like that already.
So what's so interesting about this is it really flips the script on how we normally think about negotiation.
Yeah, it suggests that negotiation isn't actually like hitting the pause button on a conflict. It's more like, you're shifting the battle to a different field, but you're still very much in the game.
Right. It's like, it's not about just coming to an agreement, but rather how can you keep moving forward, keep making progress while you're also negotiating. It's a subtle but really powerful distinction.
It is. And I think for anyone listening, that's the real key here. This isn't about being sneaky or underhanded. It's about understanding that momentum is everything. You don't want to lose that momentum just because you're talking.
Exactly. And so the mission for us today, and for you listening, is to unpack how we can actually apply this idea, this negotiate while advancing in all kinds of situations, right?
Right. From business deals to, I don't know, disagreements with family members. How can you do this effectively without looking like, you're not being genuine? Because that's a risk, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you're not careful, you can come across as manipulative or like you're not really negotiating in good faith. So we got to be smart about this.
Absolutely.
Now, to really get a grip on this, our source material points to a, pretty compelling historical figure, Napoleon Bonaparte.
Napoleon. Now, what makes him such a prime example of this in action?
Well, okay, imagine, right? Napoleon is in the middle of these huge military campaigns across Europe. Battles, sieges, the whole deal. But here's the thing, even in the midst of all that fighting, sometimes right after a major battle even, what would he do?
What would he do?
He would send out envoys to start peace talks. He'd be like, hey, let's talk this out.
Interesting. So on the surface, it looks like he's genuinely trying to de-escalate, maybe even end the conflict altogether.
Right, exactly. And that's what makes it so brilliant. Because while his enemies are focused on these peace talks, thinking maybe there's a chance for things to calm down, Napoleon, well, he's not exactly sitting idle.
Right. He's not twiddling his thumbs. What's he actually doing during this time?
What he's doing is he's using that time, that temporary lull in the fighting, to reposition his armies. Maybe he's securing key territories, shoring up supply lines, basically getting ready for the next move.
So it's like a brilliant deception almost. He's using the negotiation itself as a smokescreen for continued military preparations.
Exactly. And it's not just about moving troops around, it's also about keeping the lines of communication open, making it seem like everything's winding down. Well, in reality, he's just ramping up for something even bigger.
And the impact of this on his opponents must have been huge. They're thinking the threat is diminishing, so they naturally start to relax a little, lower their guard.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then, bam, Napoleon strikes again, often from a much stronger position than before.
Yeah.
I mean, the results speak for themselves, right?
Yeah.
Multiple victories with less resistance than you might expect.
So for our listeners, what's the core lesson here? It's that negotiation shouldn't mean stagnation. You don't want to let the process itself drain your momentum. You want to keep pushing forward in some way.
Absolutely. Now, we've seen this in a historical military context, which is fascinating. But what Robert Greene and our source material do is they distill the essence of this strategy into 3 core benefits that apply way beyond just warfare.
Okay, so what are these 3 advantages that we can all learn from?
Well, first, and we saw this with Napoleon, it's about gaining time. While your opponent, whoever they are, is wrapped up in the discussions, thinking about the deal, you're using that time to plan your next steps, gather information, get your ducks in a row.
Right, it's like you're playing a game of chess and your opponent is taking their time to think about their move. And meanwhile, you're already setting up your next 3 moves in your head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the second benefit, which is, I think, super interesting. It's the psychological impact this has on the other side. By engaging in negotiation, you're sort of creating this sense of optimism, this feeling that maybe the conflict is actually heading towards a resolution.
Right. They start to think, okay, maybe we can work this out. Maybe we don't need to be so on edge. And that's when their guard comes down a little bit, their defenses weaken.
Right, and that sets the stage for the third benefit.
Which is,
Which is that because you've been maintaining your momentum, you're actually in a much stronger position to get what you want out of the negotiation. The terms become more favorable to you because you haven't let yourself become weaker.
It's like you're constantly building up your leverage, even while you're engaged in these discussions. So when it comes time to make a deal, you're holding a lot more cards than you would have if you had just sat still.
Exactly. So, okay, we can see how powerful this is, but how does this actually translate into, like, real-world situations outside of, historical battles?
Well, the source material gives us some pretty clear examples. Let's take the business world, something I think a lot of people listening can relate to. Think about companies that are negotiating a merger or an acquisition.
Big, complex deals.
Exactly. Now, negotiate while advancing suggests that even while those talks are going on, the company shouldn't just stop everything else. It should keep pursuing new opportunities, keep innovating, keep growing.
So it's like having a backup plan, right? No matter what happens with the merger, you're still in a good position.
It's even better than a backup plan. It's like because you're still moving forward, you're actually making yourself more attractive to the other company. They see you as a strong, valuable partner, which gives you even more leverage in the negotiation.
I see. So it's like a win-win either way. Either the deal goes through and you're already in a strong position to move forward, or it doesn't and you're still stronger than you were before.
Exactly. And it's not just about mergers. This applies to any kind of business negotiation. Whether you're negotiating a contract, a partnership, whatever it is, you want to be making progress on other fronts simultaneously.
Okay, so business makes sense. But what about in the world of, say, politics and leadership? Things that affect us all on a bigger scale.
Oh, this is a big one, and it happens all the time.
Hmm.
Think about leaders who are involved in, like, peace talks or diplomacy. They're publicly trying to de-escalate tensions, right? But at the same time, they're often making strategic moves behind the scenes.
Like what kinds of moves?
It could be anything. Strengthening alliances, modernizing their military, or maybe enacting policies at home that boost their country's influence on the world stage. The point is, the negotiations are just one part of the game. They're not letting the talks stop them from advancing their overall agenda.
So it's like a multi-level chess
Right.
game, right? You've got the public face of diplomacy, and then you've got these other moves happening in the background that are all part of a bigger strategy.
Precisely. And it's not always about, sneaky or aggressive moves. Sometimes it's just about taking advantage of the time and space created by the negotiation process to make positive changes, to strengthen your position in a way that benefits everyone.
It's like playing the long game, right?
Yeah.
You're thinking several steps ahead, and you're using the negotiation period to set yourself up for success in the long run.
Exactly. And this actually brings up a really interesting point that the source material touches on. It's about how you can apply this negotiate while advancing idea in your personal life.
Oh yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Because we all negotiate on a daily basis, right? Whether it's with our families, our friends, our colleagues, there's always some level of give and take.
Right. And the key takeaway here is that you don't have to let those negotiations put your life on hold. You can still be making progress towards your own goals, even while you're working things out with other people.
So give me an example, like how could someone actually do this in, say, a family disagreement?
Sure. Let's say you're having a disagreement with your partner about, I don't know, finances or chores or something. Instead of immediately digging in your heels or getting into a big argument, you could suggest taking some time to cool off, to think things over.
So that's the negotiation part.
Exactly. But during that time, you're not just sitting around stewing. You're actually using that time to maybe do some research, get some advice from a trusted friend, or even explore alternative solutions that would work better for you.
I see. So you're not letting the disagreement derail your life. You're using it as an opportunity to learn and grow, and maybe even come back to the table with a stronger position.
Exactly. It's about being strategic and proactive, not letting the negotiation define your entire experience.
This is fascinating. And it makes me think about, like, how many times I've just let myself get stuck in a negotiation, just spinning my wheels without making any real progress.
It happens to all of us. But the point is, once you understand this idea of negotiate while advancing, you start to see things differently. You realize that you always have options. You always have the power to keep moving forward in some way.
Absolutely. Now, the source material brings up a really interesting and I think super relevant modern example of this on a global scale, China's economic rise.
Oh, this is a big one. And it really illustrates how negotiate while advancing can play out over decades.
Right. So for years, China has been involved in all these international trade negotiations, signing agreements, joining organizations, the whole deal.
Right. And on the surface, it looks like they're just playing by the rules, engaging in good faith diplomacy, trying to fit into the existing global economic order.
Right. But at the same time, something else has been happening.
What's that?
Well, they've been quietly but very deliberately building up their own economic power, investing in key industries, expanding their global influence through things like the Belt and Road Initiative, just making strategic move after strategic move.
So it's like they've been playing on two levels. They're engaged in the negotiations, but they're not letting those talks define their overall strategy. They're using the time and space created by those talks to advance their own agenda.
Exactly. And the result is that they've become a global economic powerhouse, arguably the most powerful in the world. And they did it, in part, by mastering this idea of negotiate while advancing.
It's a brilliant example of how playing a long game, of thinking strategically about every interaction, can lead to huge success.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that even when things seem peaceful or stable on the surface, there's often a lot more going on beneath the surface.
Right, and to really understand what's happening, you have to look beyond the immediate negotiations and see the bigger picture.
This brings us to a really important point that the source material emphasizes. It's about the potential dangers of actually stopping your progress while you're negotiating.
Oh yeah, this is crucial. It's not just about the benefits of keeping moving forward, it's also about the risks of standing still.
Right. And Robert Greene's warning on this is pretty stark. He says that if you genuinely pause your efforts to strengthen your position, to improve your situation while you're negotiating, you're basically giving your opponent a free pass.
Right, they get to regroup, catch their breath, maybe even come up with a plan to counter your moves. It's like you're handing them the advantage on a silver platter.
And to illustrate this point, the source material gives us another historical example. This time, it's the Cold War and the Soviet Union's approach to arms control negotiations with the U.S.
Another fascinating case study.
So for years, the Soviets were engaged in these long, drawn-out talks with the U.S. about limiting nuclear weapons. On the surface, it looked like they were genuinely interested in de-escalation.
Right, they're playing the diplomacy game.
But behind the scenes, they were doing something else.
What's that?
They were secretly, and often quite aggressively, continuing to develop and expand their nuclear arsenal.
So while they were talking about peace and disarmament, they were actually preparing for the possibility of war.
Exactly. And the result was that by the time any agreements were actually reached, the strategic balance had already shifted significantly in their favor.
It's a sobering reminder that diplomacy and negotiation, while important, shouldn't lull you into a false sense of security. You always have to be prepared for the possibility that things could go south, and you have to keep making progress towards your own goals, even while you're talking.
Absolutely. It's like you can't let your guard down just because you're at the negotiating table. You have to keep your eye on the bigger picture and keep moving forward.
Right. And this actually leads to another crucial point that the source material makes. It's a warning about being too obvious about your negotiate while advancing tactics.
Oh yeah, this is key. There's a real risk of exposure here.
Absolutely. If the other side realizes that you're not really negotiating in good faith, that you're just using the talks as a way to distract them while you keep advancing your own agenda, well, they're not going to be happy about it.
Right. They might even see it as a betrayal, and they might be more likely to break off negotiations and resort to more aggressive tactics.
Exactly. So the key is subtlety. You have to be smart about how you advance your position while you're negotiating. You don't want to be too blatant about it.
It's like you're playing poker.
Rare.
Right. You want to keep your cards close to your chest, not let your opponent know what you're really thinking.
Exactly. And to really illustrate the dangers of being too obvious about your tactics, the source material gives us a pretty dramatic historical example. Adolf Hitler's negotiations leading up to World War II.
Oh yeah, this is a classic case of what not to do.
Right. So Hitler was famous for using diplomacy and appeasement to buy time for his military buildup. He'd make promises, sign agreements, act like he was genuinely interested in peace.
But behind the scenes, he was already planning for war.
Exactly. And eventually the Allies realized that they were being played. They saw through his deception, and it backfired spectacularly.
It actually galvanized them to unite against him, which ultimately contributed to his downfall.
So the lesson here is clear. While negotiate while advancing can be a very effective strategy, it's important to do it subtly and strategically. If you're too obvious about your deception, it can blow up in your face.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balancing act. You have to keep moving forward, but you can't let the other side see your hand.
Right. And that's where I think the real skill comes in. It's about being a master strategist, understanding the psychology of negotiation, and knowing when to push forward and when to hold back.
So how can our listeners take all of this, all these historical examples and principles, and actually apply it to their own lives today? The source material actually provides 5 very actionable steps.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first one?
The first one is to never stop growing your power and resources, even during times of peace or agreement. It's about constantly improving yourself, developing your skills, building up your network, whatever it takes to make yourself stronger.
It's like you're never really out of the game. You're always training, always preparing, always looking for ways to get an edge.
Exactly. And that leads to the second step, which is to use negotiations strategically as a way to buy yourself time. While you're talking, you're also working behind the scenes to strengthen your position, gather information, and plan your next move.
It's like you're using the negotiation as a cover, a way to distract the other side while you're making real progress elsewhere.
The third step is a little more subtle. It's about creating a sense of security or even complacency in your opponent while you're subtly preparing your next move.
This is where the psychology of negotiation really comes into play. You want to make the other side feel like everything's under control, like they're in a good position, while you're actually maneuvering yourself into a stronger position.
It's almost like you're lulling them into a false sense of security,
Right.
so that when you make your move, they're completely caught off guard.
Exactly. And that brings us to the fourth step, which is all about timing. You want to be the one who dictates the pace of the negotiation, and you want to choose the moment to make your move when you're in the strongest possible position.
It's like you're setting a trap, right? You're leading the other side down a certain path, and then, bam, you spring it on them when they least expect it.
And finally, the fifth step is about unpredictability. If the other side can always anticipate your moves, they can easily counter them. But if you keep them guessing, if you're always one step ahead, they're always playing catch-up.
So it's about being a master of the unexpected,
Hmm.
keeping the other side off balance, never letting them get comfortable.
Exactly. It's about being adaptable, creative, and always thinking several moves ahead.
And to bring this full circle, to show how all of this can play out in the real world, the source material brings up a great modern business example. Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, which is now X.
Elon Musk. Always a fascinating case study.
So think about this. While the whole world was watching the very public and often quite dramatic negotiations for Musk to buy Twitter, he was reportedly already doing something else.
What was that?
He was putting together a team, securing funding, and developing a detailed plan for how he was going to restructure the company and take it in a new direction.
So by the time the deal was actually done, he wasn't starting from scratch. He was already several steps ahead.
Exactly. The negotiation period wasn't a pause for him. It was an opportunity to keep moving forward, to keep building momentum. And by the time the ink was dry on the deal, he was ready to hit the ground running.
It's a brilliant example of how you can use the negotiation process to your advantage, to set yourself up for success even before the deal is done.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder that the most successful people and organizations are always thinking several steps ahead, always looking for ways to keep moving forward, even when it seems like things are standing still.
Right. It's about having a vision, a plan, and the determination to keep pushing forward, no matter what obstacles you encounter.
And that brings us to the final thought from our source material, which really captures the essence of negotiate while advancing. It's the idea that negotiation is, in a sense, just another form of strategy, another way to engage with the world and achieve your goals.
It's about understanding that conflict and cooperation aren't mutually exclusive. You can be assertive and ambitious while also being diplomatic and collaborative.
Right. It's not about being ruthless or cutthroat. It's about being smart and strategic, about knowing how to use all the tools at your disposal to get what you want.
Exactly. And the most effective individuals and organizations are the ones who understand this. They're the ones who can navigate complex situations, negotiate effectively, and keep moving forward all at the same time.
And that's the challenge for all of us, right? To learn how to negotiate while advancing, to keep pushing forward, to never let ourselves get stuck, and to always be striving for something more.
And to leave you with a question to ponder, the next time you find yourself in any kind of negotiation, whether it's a big business deal or just a small disagreement with a friend, ask yourself this: am I just talking or am I actually moving forward?
So to wrap up this deep dive, the key message is clear. It's about never letting your guard down, never losing sight of your goals, and always finding ways to keep making progress, even in the midst of negotiation.
It's about understanding that the game never really stops. And the most successful players are the ones who are always in motion, always adapting, always striving for something more.
And on that note, we leave you with one final thought to consider. As you go about your day, as you observe the world around you, pay attention to the conversations, the negotiations, the interactions that are happening all around you. Are they just surface-level exchanges, or is there something deeper going on? Are there hidden agendas, subtle power dynamics, strategic moves being made beneath the surface? Once you start looking for it, you might be surprised at what you find. It's a perspective that can change how you see the world and how you interact with it.
So keep your eyes open, your mind sharp, and never stop moving forward.
Until next time.
See you then.